The leather strap came down across Eleanor's palms for the third time that morning, and she refused to give Reverend Blackwell the satisfaction of hearing her cry out, though her hands trembled and burned with each strike as the autumn wind of 1876 howled through the cracks of the small schoolhouse in Redemption, Colorado. "This is what becomes of women who reach beyond their station," the Reverend announced to the assembled townspeople who had gathered to witness her punishment, his voice carrying that particular blend of righteousness and cruelty that made Eleanor's stomach turn. Miss Hayes was discovered with books of philosophy, science, and literature that are forbidden to her sex. She has been corrupting her mind with knowledge meant only for men. Eleanor kept her chin high, meeting the eyes of the women in the crowd who looked away in shame or fear. She was 22 years old, unmarried, and worked as a seamstress in Mrs. Patterson's shop to support herself after her parents had died of fever 3 years prior. The books had belonged to her father, a university professor from Boston who had moved west for his health. She had hidden them under the floorboards of her rented room above the general store, reading by candlelight each night, losing herself in worlds of thought and beauty that felt like the only freedom she possessed. But Mrs. Patterson had discovered her secret 2 weeks ago when she had forgotten to hide a volume of Emerson's essays before leaving for work. The older woman had been horrified, declaring that such reading would poison Eleanor's feminine nature and make her unmarriageable. She had reported Eleanor to Reverend Blackwell, who served as both spiritual and moral authority in Redemption. The town council, composed entirely of men, had decided that public punishment and the burning of her books would serve as a warning to other women who might harbor similar ambitions. The strap came down a fourth time, and Eleanor bit the inside of her cheek hard enough to taste blood. Through the pain, she saw him for the first time. A tall man stood at the back of the crowd, separate from the others, watching with an expression that was not gleeful or approving but rather troubled and increasingly angry. He wore dusty trail clothes, a worn leather vest, and a hat pulled low over his eyes. A cowboy, she thought, probably just passing through town. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and something in his gaze steadied her, gave her strength to endure. 5 more, Reverend Blackwell declared. And then the burning. The cowboy's jaw tightened visibly. He shifted his weight, his hand moving unconsciously toward his hip before he caught himself. Eleanor saw the struggle play across his features, the war between intervention and the knowledge that a stranger had no right to interfere in a town's justice, no matter how unjust it might be. She endured the remaining strikes in silence, her hands swelling and bleeding by the end. Then Reverend Blackwell produced a wooden crate filled with her precious books, her father's books, the volumes she had treasured and protected through years of loneliness and grief. He set them in the dirt street and struck a match. "No," Eleanor whispered, the first sound of protest she had allowed herself. "Please." "Knowledge is a burden that weakens the female mind," the Reverend said, touching the flame to the pages of a poetry collection. "This is for your own salvation, Miss Hayes." Eleanor watched through tears as the flames consumed the words that had sustained her. She watched until the books were nothing but ash and ember, until the crowd began to disperse, satisfied that righteousness had been served. Mrs. Patterson told her coldly that her position at the dress shop had been terminated, that no decent establishment would employ a woman of such questionable character. She stumbled away from the schoolhouse, cradling her injured hands against her chest, with nowhere to go and no prospects in a town that had just branded her as something dangerous and shameful. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as she walked without direction, trying to formulate some kind of plan through the haze of pain and loss. "Miss." She turned to find the cowboy from the crowd following her at her respectful distance. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of whiskey in sunlight. His face was weathered but kind, with strong features that spoke of integrity. "You should not approach me," Eleanor said quietly. The Reverend has made it clear that I am not fit company. The Reverend is a goddamned fool, the cowboy said bluntly, and despite everything, Eleanor felt a small spark of surprise at his directness. Pardon my language, miss, but what I just witnessed was not justice. It was cruelty dressed up in scripture. Your opinion, however appreciated, will not change the facts of my situation, Eleanor replied, trying to keep her voice steady. I have no employment, I will be evicted from my room by week's end, and I have been publicly shamed. Unless you have a solution to any of those problems, I would prefer to suffer my humiliation in private. The cowboy removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that seemed habitual. My name is James Cordell. I own a cattle ranch about 15 miles north of here, up in the foothills. It is not a large operation, just me and my horses and about 200 head of cattle. I had come to town to hire a housekeeper, someone to cook and maintain the cabin while I am working the herd. The position includes room and board and fair wages. If you are willing, the job is yours. Eleanor stared at him, searching his face for signs of deception or ulterior motive. You do not know me. For all you know, I might be exactly what the Reverend claims, corrupted and dangerous. You are a woman who was punished for reading books, James said simply. That tells me you have a mind and the courage to use it, even when doing so costs you dearly. Those are exactly the qualities I respect. I will not lie to you, Miss Hayes. It is isolated up there and the work is hard. But I give you my word as a man of honor that you will be treated with respect and paid fairly. And no one will take a strap to you for reading or for anything else. She wanted to be cautious, to think through all the implications and possibilities. But caution was a luxury she could no longer afford. She had perhaps $3 to her name, no family, no friends willing to associate with her after this morning's spectacle, and winter was coming to the Colorado high country. When would you need me to start? She asked. I am heading back this afternoon. If you need time to gather your belongings, I can wait. Eleanor looked down at her ruined hands, then back at the town that had rejected her so completely. I have no belongings worth gathering. I am ready now. James studied her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, a softening that made her chest tighten unexpectedly. Let me at least get some salve and bandages from the mercantile for your hands, and you will need a coat. The evenings get cold in the high country, even in September. He disappeared into the general store before she could protest, leaving her standing in the street feeling unmoored and strange. When he emerged, he carried a bundle that included not just medical supplies and a warm wool coat, but also a pair of sturdy gloves, a thick blanket, and a small sack that clinked with the sound of canned goods. You did not need to do all this, Eleanor said as he helped her into the coat, his hands careful and impersonal. Cannot have my housekeeper freezing or starving before she even gets to the ranch, James replied lightly, but his eyes were serious. Come on. We have a few hours of riding ahead of us. His horse was a sturdy bay gelding with intelligent eyes and a patient temperament. James mounted first, then reached down to help Eleanor up behind him. She hesitated only a moment before accepting his hand, settling herself on the horse's back and trying to figure out where to put her hands without seeming improper. You will want to hold on, James said practically. The trail gets rough in places. Eleanor wrapped her arms loosely around his waist, feeling the solid strength of him through his shirt, and tried not to think about how long it had been since she had been this close to another human being. The horse moved forward at an easy walk, carrying them out of Redemption and toward the mountains that rose blue and imposing in the distance. They rode in silence for the first hour, Eleanor watching as the town disappeared behind them and the landscape opened up into rolling grassland dotted with pine and aspen. The aspens were just beginning to turn, their leaves flashing gold in the afternoon light. Despite the pain in her hands and the upheaval of her entire life, Eleanor felt something loosening in her chest, some tight knot of fear and constraint beginning to unwind. "Why did you come to town today?" she asked finally, her voice barely audible over the sound of hoofbeats. "Needed supplies and figured it was time to find some help around the ranch," James answered. "I have been putting it off, truth be told. I am not much for company most days, but the place is getting away from me and I cannot keep living on burned beans and bitter coffee." "Are you not lonely out there by yourself?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I prefer honest loneliness to dishonest company. I spent years working for other men's ranches, taking orders, living in bunkhouses full of talk and noise and politics. When I finally saved enough to buy my own land, the silence felt like a blessing." Eleanor understood that more than she could articulate. "What made you come west?" "Same as most folks, I suppose. I was looking for something different than what I had. I grew up in Ohio, worked in my father's mill until I was 18. He wanted me to take over the business, marry the daughter of his business partner, live the life he had planned for me. But I could not breathe in that life. So I left, worked my way west doing whatever jobs I could find and eventually ended up here." He paused. "What about you? Your accent suggests you are not originally from Colorado." "Boston," Eleanor said. "My father taught literature and philosophy at the university. My mother died when I was young, so it was mostly just the two of us. He loved learning more than anything, and he taught me to love it too. He never understood why women should be educated differently than men, so he taught me everything he taught his students. When his health began to fail, the doctors suggested a drier climate. We came to Colorado when I was 19. He died 6 months later." "I am sorry," James said, and his voice carried genuine sympathy. "That must have been difficult." "It was," Eleanor acknowledged, "but I still had his books." Until today. She felt James's back stiffen with anger. "What happened today was wrong. You know that, do you not?" "Knowing something is wrong does not change the reality of it," Eleanor said quietly. "The law may not explicitly forbid women from reading certain books, but social custom holds just as much power, perhaps more. A woman can be ruined by reputation alone. Then the customs need changing. Many things need changing, Mr. Cordell. But change requires power, and power is not something generally granted to women." "Call me James," he said. "And you are wrong about power. The Reverend and his followers fear you precisely because you have power. Knowledge is power, and they know it. Why else would they work so hard to keep it from you?" Eleanor had never thought of it quite that way before. The idea sent a small thrill through her, frightening and exhilarating in equal measure. They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence now, the kind that exists between people who understand something fundamental about each other. The trail grew steeper as they climbed into the foothills, winding through stands of pine that filled the air with their sharp, clean scent. Eleanor saw deer grazing in a meadow, their heads lifting in alert watchfulness as the horse passed. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermal currents with effortless grace. The world felt immense and beautiful, so different from the cramped, judgmental confines of redemption. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, James guided the horse through a final stand of aspens and into a clearing. Eleanor caught her breath. The cabin sat nestled against the mountainside, built of solid logs with a stone chimney and a wide porch that faced the valley below. It was small but well constructed, with glass windows that caught the dying light and a neat barn behind it where she could see horses moving in their stalls. Beyond the cabin, grassland rolled away toward the mountains, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance, small dark shapes against the golden grass. "It is not much," James said, and she could hear uncertainty in his voice for the first time. "But it is sturdy and the roof does not leak." "It is beautiful," Eleanor said honestly. "I have never seen anything so beautiful." James dismounted and helped her down, his hands steadying her when she stumbled slightly, stiff from the long ride. He led the horse to the barn and she followed, watching as he unsaddled the gelding with practiced efficiency and made sure the animal had water and feed. "There are 2 other horses," James explained, nodding toward a black mare and a paint gelding in the neighboring stalls. The mare is Rosie. She is gentle enough if you need to ride anywhere. The paint is Storm. He is not as friendly, but he is a good working horse. Eleanor stroked Rosie's soft nose, feeling the mare's warm breath against her injured palms. The simple contact with the animal soothed something in her spirit. James led her to the cabin and pushed open the door. The interior was dim and dusty, with a large main room that served as kitchen and living space, a stone fireplace dominating one wall, and two doors that presumably led to bedrooms. The furnishings were simple and masculine: a rough-hewn table and chairs, a worn sofa near the fireplace, shelves that held dishes and cooking supplies. But it was clean enough, and Eleanor could see the good bones of the place beneath the bachelor neglect. "The room on the left is mine," James said. "The one on the right would be yours. It is small, but there is a bed and a chest for your belongings." He paused, looking around at the dusty surfaces and the dishes piled in the basin. "I know it needs work. I have let things slide." "I have seen far worse," Eleanor assured him. She was more focused on the fact that she would have her own room, her own space, her own door that closed. After sharing a single cramped room above the general store, it felt like an impossible luxury. James lit a lamp as the last light faded from the windows. In the warm glow, Eleanor could see the fatigue around his eyes, the way his shoulders carried the tension of long days and longer responsibilities. "Are you hungry? I can make something, though I warn you my cooking skills are limited." "Why do you not let me earn my keep?" Eleanor suggested. "If you show me where everything is, I can prepare a meal." "Your hands," James protested. "Let me take care of those first." He pulled out a chair and gestured for her to sit, then brought over the medical supplies he had purchased. With surprising gentleness, he cleaned the cuts and welts on her palms, applying salve that stung but immediately soothed the burning pain. His hands were calloused and scarred from work, but his touch was careful, almost tender. "You did not deserve what they did to you," James said quietly as he wrapped bandages around her hands. "I want you to know that. You did nothing wrong." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, the first she had allowed herself to shed since the morning's ordeal. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saying that. Thank you for bringing me here." James met her eyes, and in that moment, something passed between them, an understanding and connection that went deeper than words. "You are safe here," he promised. "I give you my word." Over the following weeks, Eleanor settled into the rhythms of ranch life with surprising ease. She woke before dawn to start the fire and prepare breakfast, usually salt pork and eggs and strong coffee that James consumed with grateful enthusiasm. While he worked outside, managing the cattle and maintaining the property, she cleaned and organized the cabin, mended his clothes, and learned to cook more elaborate meals using the supplies he brought back from occasional trips to town. It was hard work, harder than anything she had done at the dress shop, but Eleanor found satisfaction in it that she had not expected. There was honesty in the labor, a direct connection between effort and result that appealed to her. The cabin transformed under her care, becoming not just livable but comfortable, even welcoming. James proved to be an easy person to live with, quiet and respectful, never intruding on her space or making her feel uncomfortable. He was gone most of each day, working the herd or mending fences or performing the 1,000 tasks that kept a ranch running. But in the evenings, they would sit together at the table over dinner, and slowly, carefully, they began to talk. Eleanor learned that James was 28, that he had been in Colorado for 6 years, and that he had bought this land 3 years ago with money saved from years of careful work. He was not educated in the formal sense, but he was intelligent and curious, asking her questions about the books she had read, about philosophy and poetry and ideas. She learned that he could be funny, that he had a dry wit that caught her off guard and made her laugh in ways she had not laughed in years. James learned that Eleanor had a sharp mind and sharper tongue when provoked, that she could discuss Emerson and Thoreau with passion, that she had opinions on everything from politics to agriculture to the nature of the soul. He learned that she was brave and resilient, that she did not complain about the isolation or the hard work, and that she had a kindness in her that extended to every creature on the ranch. One evening in early October, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Eleanor was preparing dinner when James came in carrying something wrapped in oilcloth. He set it on the table with unusual care, looking almost nervous. "I went into Silverton today," he said. Silverton was a larger town about 30 miles west, with more businesses and fewer people likely to know Eleanor's story. "There is a bookshop there. The owner did not seem to care much about who was buying or why. I thought maybe you might want these." Eleanor unwrapped the oilcloth with trembling hands. Inside were 4 books, their covers new and unblemished. A collection of Whitman's poetry, a novel by George Eliot, a volume of essays by Margaret Fuller, and a copy of Jane Eyre. She stared at them, unable to speak, her throat tight with emotion. "If they are not the right ones, I can exchange them," James said quickly, misreading her silence. "The shop owner said these were popular, but I did not know what you would like. I should have asked first. I am sorry." "They are perfect," Eleanor managed to say, looking up at him with tears in her eyes. "James, this is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me." He looked embarrassed but pleased. "You should not have to go without books. It is not right." "I know they cannot replace the ones you lost, but I thought maybe they would be a start." Eleanor set the books down carefully and did something impulsive, something she had not planned. She crossed the space between them and hugged him, pressing her face against his chest, feeling his heart beat strong and steady beneath her cheek. James went still for a moment, surprised, then his arms came around her, holding her with a gentleness that made her want to weep. "Thank you," she whispered against his shirt. "Thank you." They stood like that for a long moment, neither wanting to be the first to pull away. When they finally separated, there was a new awareness between them, a recognition of something that had been building since the day they met. That night, Eleanor sat by the fire and read Whitman's poetry while James worked on repairing a bridle, the silence between them comfortable and companionable. She would glance up occasionally and find him watching her with an expression she could not quite decipher, something tender and wondering and maybe a little awed. As October progressed, and the aspens turned fully gold and the nights grew cold enough for frost, Eleanor and James continued their careful dance around each other, growing closer but not yet acknowledging what was happening between them. They worked together on projects around the ranch, James teaching her to ride Rosie properly, Eleanor teaching him to appreciate poetry by reading aloud while he worked. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, discovering shared values and perspectives that made them feel less alone in the world. One afternoon, James came in from working on the barn roof and found Eleanor standing in the main room with a measuring tape, a thoughtful expression on her face as she studied the wall opposite the fireplace. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, washing his hands in the basin. "This wall," Eleanor said slowly. "It is just empty space right now. I was thinking about what could be done with it." "What did you have in mind?" She hesitated, then decided to be bold. "Shelves. Bookshelves. I know you went to considerable expense to buy those 4 books and I treasure them. But I keep thinking about all the books that are out there, all the knowledge and stories and ideas. If we built shelves, we could gradually fill them. Create a real collection, a proper library." James walked over to stand beside her, looking at the wall with new eyes. "How many shelves are you envisioning?" "As many as will fit," Eleanor admitted. "I know it is extravagant. I know books are expensive and perhaps not the most practical use of resources. But James, what happened in Redemption, the fear and cruelty directed at women who read, it is happening everywhere. Women are taught that their minds are lesser, that they should not think or question or learn. Having books here, building a library, it would be a kind of resistance, a statement that knowledge belongs to everyone." James was quiet for a long moment, and Eleanor worried she had overstepped, presumed too much about her place in his home and life. But then he smiled, that rare full smile that transformed his entire face. We will need a lot of lumber, he said. And it will take time to do it right. But yes, let us build you a library. Let us build the finest library in the Colorado High Country. Eleanor felt her heart swell with an emotion she was not quite ready to name. You do not think it is foolish. I think it is exactly right, James said firmly. I think you deserve to be surrounded by books, to have all the knowledge and beauty you can hold. And I think any world that tries to deny you that is a world that needs changing. They began planning the library that very evening, sketching designs on paper, measuring and calculating. James had woodworking skills from his years of ranch maintenance, and Eleanor had a good eye for organization and aesthetics. They decided on floor-to-ceiling shelves that would span the entire wall, with space for hundreds of books, maybe even 1,000 if they built carefully. The next day, James rode to the nearest lumber mill and ordered wood, explaining that he needed quality planks for shelving. The mill owner was puzzled about what kind of ranch work required such fine lumber, but James offered no explanation, simply paid for the materials and arranged for delivery. While they waited for the wood to arrive, James taught Eleanor the basics of carpentry. They started with small projects, building a new set of shelves for the kitchen, repairing a damaged windowsill. He showed her how to measure twice and cut once, how to sand until the wood was smooth as silk, how to join pieces so they would hold strong for years. Eleanor proved to be an apt student, her hands growing confident with the tools, her measurements precise. You are good at this, James observed one afternoon as she successfully fitted 2 boards together with a perfect joint. I like the logic of it, Eleanor replied. Everything has to make sense, has to fit together properly, or the whole structure fails. It is like constructing an argument in philosophy. Each piece must be sound, and the connections between them must be solid. James laughed. I have never heard carpentry compared to philosophy before, but I suppose you are right. The wood arrived in early November, and they began work on the library in earnest. James built the frame first, sturdy uprights that would support the weight of hundreds of books. Then they worked together on the shelves themselves, measuring and cutting and sanding until each one was perfect. It was painstaking work, but Eleanor loved every moment of it. She loved working beside James, their shoulders occasionally brushing as they measured and fitted pieces together. She loved the smell of fresh-cut wood and the satisfaction of seeing the library take shape board by board. They worked in the evenings after James finished his daily ranch work, and on Sunday afternoons when the weather cooperated. As November progressed, and the first snows began to dust the high peaks, the library grew. Eleanor would stand back sometimes and just look at it, marveling at what they were creating together, this temple to knowledge and freedom rising against the wall of a simple ranch cabin in the Colorado wilderness. It was during one of these evenings when they were sanding the shelves to silky smoothness that James suddenly spoke into the comfortable silence. I am in love with you. Eleanor's hand stilled on the sandpaper. Her heart seemed to stop and then start again, beating so hard she was sure James must be able to hear it. She turned to look at him, finding him watching her with an expression of mingled hope and fear. I know I have no right, James continued, his words coming faster now as if he needed to get them all out before he lost courage. You came here as my employee, and I promised to treat you with respect. I have tried not to let my feelings show, tried to be honorable. But Eleanor, you have changed everything for me. This cabin, this life, it all means something different now that you are in it. You are the bravest, most intelligent, most fascinating person I have ever known, and I am in love with you. I think I have been since the day I saw you standing there in town, refusing to cry out while they hurt you. Eleanor set down the sandpaper with a trembling hand. James, if you do not feel the same, I understand, he said quickly. We can forget I said anything. You can stay here as long as you like, and I will never mention it again. I will not make you uncomfortable in your own home. James, Eleanor said again, more firmly this time, and crossed the space between them. She took his face in her hands, looking into those whiskey-colored eyes that had been the first kind thing she had seen on the worst day of her life. "I am in love with you too. I have been falling for weeks now, and I did not know how to tell you. You saved me, not just from poverty and exile, but from believing that I deserved what they did to me. You made me feel valued and respected. You listened to my thoughts as if they mattered. You are building me a library, James. How could I not love you?" The kiss, when it came, was gentle at first, tentative and sweet, both of them half afraid they were dreaming. But then James wrapped his arms around Eleanor's waist and pulled her closer, and she wound her fingers into his hair, and the kiss deepened into something that spoke of months of longing and restraint finally released. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against Eleanor's. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, and I know we have only known each other a few months, but I am sure, Eleanor, I have never been more sure of anything in my life. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my days making you happy." "Yes," Eleanor said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." They held each other in the half-finished library, the lamp light flickering over the bare shelves that waited to be filled with books and knowledge, and all the beautiful possibilities of their future together. They were married 2 weeks later in Silverton, in a simple ceremony at the courthouse with 2 clerks as witnesses. Eleanor wore a new dress that James had bought for her, deep blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes. James wore his best shirt and a suit jacket he had not taken out in years. They exchanged simple gold bands and promises to love and honor each other for all their days. The ride back to the ranch felt different, suffused with joy and possibility. Eleanor sat in front of James this time, his arms around her as he held the reins, and she leaned back against his chest, feeling safe and cherished and home. That night, they came together as husband and wife in the marriage bed, tender and passionate and reverent with each other. James worshipped Eleanor's body with his hands and mouth, taking his time, learning what made her sigh and gasp with pleasure. Eleanor discovered that she loved the feel of his skin against hers, the strength in his body, the way he whispered her name like a prayer. They learned each other slowly, carefully, building pleasure until it crested and broke over them in waves that left them tangled together, breathless and complete. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Eleanor's head on his chest, James said softly, "I want to finish the library. I want to fill it with every book we can find. I want our home to be a place where learning is celebrated, where you can read and study and think freely." "Our home," Eleanor repeated, loving the sound of it. "Our library. James, do you ever wonder if we could do more? If we could help other women who are in situations like I was?" "What do you mean?" Eleanor propped herself up on one elbow, looking at him in the moonlight that streamed through the window. "There must be other women in other towns, punished for reading, for thinking, for wanting more than what society allows them. What if our library could be a refuge? What if we let it be known that women who need help, who need a place to learn and be safe, could come here?" James considered this, his hand absently stroking Eleanor's hair. "It would be dangerous. We would be defying social conventions in a way that could bring us trouble." "I know," Eleanor acknowledged. "I am not asking you to put yourself at risk for my ideals. But if you were willing, I think we could do real good." "If you are willing to face the risks, then so am I," James said firmly. "Let us build a library and let us make it a place of sanctuary. We will fill it with books and we will open it to any woman who needs what you needed." Eleanor kissed him, deep and grateful and full of love. "How did I get so lucky as to find you?" "I think we found each other," James replied. "And I intend to thank whatever force of providence brought you into my life every day for the rest of my existence." They spent that winter finishing the library and beginning to fill it. Every few weeks, James would make the trip to Silverton and return with an armful of books. He bought poetry and philosophy, novels and scientific treatises, history and political theory. He spent money they probably could not afford to spend, but he never hesitated, never suggested that books were an unnecessary luxury. Eleanor organized the growing collection carefully, creating a system so they could find anything they needed. She read voraciously, sometimes finishing a book in a single day, then sharing her thoughts with James in the evenings. He began reading too, slowly working his way through volumes that had once seemed impossibly complex, asking Eleanor questions, engaging with ideas that opened his mind in ways he had not imagined possible. In January, as the snow piled high around the cabin and the work outside slowed, James built Eleanor a desk near the window that looked out over the valley. It was beautiful work, crafted with obvious love, with hidden compartments for letters and a smooth surface perfect for writing. "What is this for?" Eleanor asked, running her hand over the satiny wood. "For you to write," James said simply. "You have thoughts and ideas that deserve to be recorded. I thought perhaps you might want to write essays or philosophy or whatever you feel moved to create." Eleanor was overwhelmed by the gesture, by James's absolute faith in her abilities. She began writing that very day, putting down her thoughts on women's education, on freedom and knowledge, on the ways society constrained and limited half its population. The words flowed from her pen, ideas that had been building for years finally finding expression. As winter gave way to spring of 1877, word began to spread in the surrounding territories about the ranch in the foothills where a woman had built a library. It happened slowly at first. Whispers passed between women who knew other women, quiet messages delivered through channels that men did not notice or think to monitor. In March, a young woman appeared at their door, thin and frightened, saying she had been beaten by her father for teaching herself to read. Eleanor and James took her in without hesitation, gave her a room in the barn they had converted for guests, and let her spend her days in the library while James taught her basic ranch work. The young woman, whose name was Sarah, stayed for 2 months before moving on to stay with a cousin in California who had promised her work. But she left changed, strengthened by knowledge and kindness, able to read full books and write her own name with confidence. Others came after her. A widow who wanted to learn mathematics so she could manage her late husband's business without being cheated. A farm girl who dreamed of becoming a teacher but had been denied education beyond basic literacy. A woman fleeing an arranged marriage who needed time and space to figure out who she was and what she wanted from life. James and Eleanor welcomed them all, gave them access to the growing library, provided meals and shelter and safety. James never complained about the extra work or the invasion of his privacy. He seemed to take genuine satisfaction in seeing the women who came through their doors grow in confidence and capability. The ranch became a kind of haven, a secret place where women could learn and think and be themselves without fear of punishment or shame. Eleanor taught informal classes in the library, covering everything from basic literacy to advanced philosophy. James taught practical skills, horsemanship and carpentry and ranch management, treating the women as capable students rather than delicate creatures who needed protecting from knowledge. It was not without difficulties. In May, a man came to the ranch demanding the return of his sister, who had been staying with them for 3 weeks. James met him on the porch with a rifle across his lap, his expression calm but implacable. "Your sister is an adult, free to make her own choices," James said evenly. "If she wishes to leave with you, that is her decision, but I will not let you force her." The man blustered and threatened, but James did not move, did not waver. Eventually, the man rode away, and his sister chose to stay another month before leaving on her own terms to start a new life in Denver. In June, Reverend Blackwell and 2 men from Redemption appeared, having heard rumors about what was happening at the Cordell Ranch. Eleanor felt her stomach clench with old fear when she saw them riding up, but James put a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You do not have to speak to them if you do not wish to," he said quietly. "I will handle this." But Eleanor squared her shoulders and walked out onto the porch beside her husband. She had been a victim once, she would not be one again. "Reverend Blackwell," she said coolly. "To what do we owe this visit?" The Reverend looked older than she remembered, his face deeply lined and his eyes cold. "We have heard troubling reports, Miss Hayes. They say you are running some kind of school for women here, teaching them things that are not meant for the female mind." "It is Mrs. Cordell now," Eleanor corrected. "And we are not running a school, we have a library and we allow women to use it. There is no law against that." "There are laws of decency and propriety," the Reverend said sharply. "You are encouraging women to defy their families, to abandon their duties, to reach beyond their proper station." "We are encouraging women to think," James interjected, his voice hard. "If that is threatening to you, perhaps you should examine why." One of the men with the Reverend, a rancher named Sutton, spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "You are causing trouble, Cordell. Women are leaving their homes, defying their fathers and husbands. It has to stop." "Women are making their own choices," Eleanor said firmly. "We force no one to come here, and we force no one to stay. We simply offer knowledge and safety. If that is causing trouble, then perhaps the trouble lies in systems that try to keep women ignorant and powerless." The Reverend's face flushed red. "You were punished once for your pride and defiance, girl. Do not think that punishment cannot be repeated." James stood up from his chair, and there was something dangerous in his posture, a coiled readiness that made the three men shift uneasily. "You will not lay a hand on my wife," he said, his voice deadly quiet, "and you will not threaten her. This is my land and you are trespassing on it. I suggest you leave before I make you leave." The three men stared at James, calculating their chances. Whatever they saw in his face made them decide against violence. Reverend Blackwell straightened in his saddle, trying to recover some dignity. "You are making enemies, Cordell, both of you. This will not end well for you." "Thank you for your concern," Eleanor said with icy politeness. "Now get off our property." They left, but Eleanor knew it was not over. She and James discussed it that night in bed, talking quietly about the risks they were taking. "We could stop," James offered. "Close the library to outsiders, go back to living quietly. I do not want you in danger, Eleanor." "I am already in danger simply for being a woman who reads and thinks," Eleanor replied. "At least this way I am doing something meaningful with that danger. I do not want to stop, James. Do you?" He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "No, I think what we are doing matters. I just wish the world was different, that you did not have to fight so hard just to be yourself." "The world will not change unless people fight to change it," Eleanor said. "We are fighting in our small way. It may not be much, but it is something." "It is everything," James said fiercely. "Eleanor, you are changing lives. Every woman who comes through here leaves stronger, more capable, more free. That is not a small thing. That is revolutionary." Summer passed in a blur of activity. The library now held over 300 books, an impressive collection that continued to grow. James had built additional shelving along 2 other walls, creating space for even more volumes. The room had become beautiful, with comfortable chairs for reading, good lamps for working in the evenings, and a sense of warmth and welcome that made everyone who entered feel safe. Eleanor continued her writing, producing essays that James carefully copied and sent to newspapers and journals in larger cities. Some were rejected, but a few were published, usually under a male pseudonym since editors would not seriously consider work by a woman. Still, the ideas were getting out there, reaching people who might never set foot in their mountain library. In August, Eleanor realized she was pregnant. She told James one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. She need not have worried. He looked stunned for a moment, then a slow smile spread across his face, transforming him. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Eleanor, we are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. "I am overjoyed," James said, pulling her into his arms and holding her as if she were made of spun glass. "I cannot believe I get to have this, a life with you, a child of our own. It is more than I ever dreamed possible." They prepared for the baby through the fall, James building a cradle with the same care he had given to Eleanor's desk and the library shelves. Eleanor continued her work with the women who came to the ranch, though James worried constantly about her overdoing it. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," Eleanor reminded him when he tried to insist she rest instead of teaching a class on literature. "Women have been having babies and living full lives simultaneously for all of human history." "Not my wife having my baby," James countered. "That is unprecedented and therefore requires extra caution." Eleanor laughed and kissed him, loving his protectiveness even when it was excessive. In December, when the first serious snows came and travel became difficult, they had a reprieve from visitors. It was just the two of them again, cozy in the cabin with the fire burning and the library full of books. James read aloud to Eleanor in the evenings, his voice steady and comforting as he worked his way through novels and poetry. Eleanor worked on preparations for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, her hands busy while her mind turned over all the changes that were coming. "What kind of world will our child inherit?" she wondered one evening, setting aside her sewing. "Will things be different for them?" "They will be different because we will make them different," James said confidently. "Our daughter or son will grow up knowing that knowledge is valuable, that thinking is important, that women and men are equally deserving of education and freedom. They will see their mother as a teacher and writer, respected and capable. That alone will shape how they understand the world." "I hope you are right," Eleanor said softly. "I am right," James assured her. "Change is slow, but it happens. Every woman we help, every book we add to this library, every essay you publish, it all adds up. We are part of something larger than ourselves." Their son was born on a cold March morning in 1878, arriving early and in a hurry after only a few hours of labor. James delivered the baby himself with Eleanor's instructions, since the midwife from Silverton could not make it through a late-season snowstorm. He placed the squalling infant on Eleanor's chest with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "You did it," he kept saying. "Eleanor, you did it." "He is perfect." They named him Thomas after Eleanor's father. He was a healthy, vigorous baby with his mother's dark hair and his father's eyes. James was immediately besotted, spending hours just watching the baby sleep, marveling at his tiny fingers and the miracle of his existence. "I did not know I could love anything this much," James confessed one night as he rocked a fussy Thomas while Eleanor tried to get some desperately needed sleep. "Except for you, of course. But this is different. He is so small and helpless, and he depends on us for everything." "It is terrifying and wonderful at the same time." Eleanor, exhausted but happy, smiled at the sight of her strong cowboy husband cradling their infant son with such tenderness. "You are going to be an excellent father." "I am going to try," James promised. "I want him to grow up knowing he is loved, that his thoughts and feelings matter, that he can be anything he wants to be." As Thomas grew through his first year, the work at the ranch continued. Women still came seeking sanctuary and knowledge, though James and Eleanor had to be more selective now, making sure they could manage the additional people while caring for an infant. The library continued to expand, now holding over 500 books. Eleanor wrote when she could, between nursing Thomas and teaching classes and managing the household. It was exhausting but fulfilling, a life full of purpose and meaning. In the fall of 1878, a reporter from a San Francisco newspaper arrived, having heard about the unusual library in the Colorado mountains. James was suspicious at first, protective of their privacy, and worried about exposing Eleanor to potential ridicule. But Eleanor decided to speak with the reporter, a woman named Catherine who had traveled for weeks to find them. "I read one of your essays," Catherine explained as they sat in the library, Thomas napping in his cradle nearby. "The one about women's education. It was published under a man's name, but I did research and traced it back to you. I want to tell your story, to let people know what you are building here." Eleanor was hesitant, but Catherine was persuasive and seemed genuinely committed to portraying their work accurately. She stayed for a week, interviewing both Eleanor and James, speaking with women who had found refuge at the ranch, and documenting the library in detailed sketches since she had no photographer with her. The article was published in December and caused a sensation. Catherine had written movingly about Eleanor's punishment in Redemption, about James's decision to build a library for his wife, about the haven they had created for women seeking knowledge. The piece was sympathetic but not saccharine, acknowledging the risks and controversies while celebrating the bravery of what the Cordells were doing. The response was overwhelming. Letters poured in from around the country, some supportive, some viciously critical. 3 different women's rights organizations asked if Eleanor would speak at their conferences. A wealthy widow in New York sent a check and a list of 50 books she thought the library should have. A minister in Kansas wrote a furious letter condemning Eleanor as a corrupting influence on proper womanhood. Through it all, James remained steadfast. He read every supportive letter aloud to Eleanor, tossed the hateful ones into the fire, and continued building shelves to accommodate the books that were now arriving as donations from around the country. "We have started something," Eleanor said one evening, looking around at the library that had grown far beyond what they had originally imagined. Books lined 3 full walls now, with plans to expand into an addition James was designing. "I do not think we can stop it even if we wanted to." "Do you want to stop it?" James asked. Eleanor thought about the women she had taught, the minds she had helped awaken, the essays she had written that were slowly changing conversations about women's rights and education. She thought about Thomas sleeping peacefully in the next room and the world she wanted him to grow up in. "No," she said firmly. "I want to keep going. I want to see how far we can take this." "Then we keep going," James agreed. "Together always." The years that followed were full and challenging and deeply rewarding. The library grew to hold over 1,000 books by 1880, requiring an addition to the cabin that doubled its size. Women came from across the Western territories to spend time learning and recovering and discovering their own strength. Some stayed for weeks, others for months. A few never left, settling in the area and becoming part of a loose community of educated, independent women that scandalized traditionalists and inspired progressives. Eleanor gave birth to 2 more children, a daughter named Margaret in 1880 and another son named Samuel in 1882. James proved to be as devoted a father as Eleanor had known he would be, teaching all 3 children to ride and work and think for themselves. The children grew up surrounded by books and ideas, learning that education was valuable and that their mother's work mattered. Thomas inherited his mother's love of reading and his father's practical skills, equally comfortable discussing philosophy or repairing a fence. Margaret was fierce and independent, declaring at age 5 that she intended to be a doctor, a profession closed to women but one that Eleanor encouraged her daughter to pursue anyway. Samuel was gentle and artistic, drawing pictures of the mountains and animals with surprising skill. The library became famous in certain circles, a symbol of resistance to oppressive conventions and a beacon of hope for women seeking knowledge. Eleanor published 2 books under her own name, collections of essays about women's rights, education, and freedom that sold surprisingly well and established her as a serious thinker in progressive circles. James never sought recognition for his role in creating the library, content to be known as Eleanor's supportive husband. But Eleanor made sure that everyone understood that the library had been his idea, that he had built it with his own hands as an act of love and solidarity. She wrote about him in her books, describing how a cowboy had seen injustice and responded not with violence but with construction, building a sanctuary for learning in defiance of ignorance and fear. Their marriage deepened over the years, growing richer and more multifaceted as they navigated the challenges of raising children, running a ranch, and maintaining a refuge for learning. They still read together in the evenings when they could, James's voice steady and familiar as he worked through whatever book Eleanor had recommended. They still talked late into the night about ideas and dreams and the changes they wanted to see in the world. Do you ever regret it? Eleanor asked one evening in 1885, when they were both approaching their 30s and the children were finally asleep after a particularly chaotic day. Taking me in, building the library, dealing with all the controversy and difficulty. James looked at her as if she had asked him whether he regretted breathing. Eleanor, marrying you and building this library are the two best things I have ever done in my life. Every challenge, every risk, every moment of difficulty has been worth it. You have made me better than I was. You have given me purpose and joy and a family I cherish. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Eleanor felt her eyes well with tears, even after 9 years of marriage, still moved by the depth of James's love and commitment. I love you more than I can articulate. You saved me, James. You gave me freedom when the world was trying to take it away. You built me a library when books had been burned. You have stood beside me through everything, never asking me to be smaller or quieter or less than I am. I could not have asked for a better partner in life. We saved each other, James said, pulling her close. I was living half a life before you, going through motions, existing but not fully alive. You made me see what was possible, made me want to be part of something bigger than just surviving. We built this life together, Eleanor. Every piece of it. By 1890, the library held over 3,000 books and had become an official institution, with formal programs for women's education that had gained recognition from progressive organizations across the country. Eleanor taught regular courses, and they had hired 2 other women as assistant teachers. The ranch had grown too, with additional buildings to house long-term residents and a proper schoolhouse for the children and any others who wanted to learn. Thomas was 14, already working alongside his father on the ranch while reading philosophy in his spare time. Margaret was 10 and fierce, determined to blaze her own trail regardless of society's expectations. Samuel was 8 and dreaming in colors, filling sketchbooks with images of the beautiful world around him. James was 42 now, his dark hair touched with gray at the temples, his face lined by sun and wind and years of hard work. But his eyes were still warm and kind, and his love for Eleanor had only grown stronger with time. Eleanor was 36, her dark hair worn in a practical bun, her hands strong from years of work but still graceful when she turned the pages of a book. She had become a respected voice in the women's rights movement, traveling occasionally to give speeches while James managed the ranch and children. One autumn evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Eleanor reflected on how far they had come from that terrible day in Redemption 14 years ago. You remember when you first saw me? She asked James, her hand clasped in his. Every detail, James replied. You standing there, refusing to cry out while they hurt you, the way you held your chin up, even when they burned your books. I fell a little bit in love with you in that moment, though I did not understand it then. I just knew I had to help you, that I could not let the world break someone that brave. And now we have all this, Eleanor said, gesturing to the cabin with its library addition, the surrounding buildings, the life they had built from pain and loss. 3 children, a library with thousands of books, women whose lives we have changed. It is more than I ever imagined possible. It is not finished yet, James said with a smile. We have years ahead of us, Eleanor, more books to add, more lives to touch, more children to raise. Our work is far from over. Good, Eleanor said, leaning her head on his shoulder. I am not ready to be finished. There is still so much to do, so much to change. As the sun set behind the mountains and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Eleanor thought about the girl she had been, punished for the simple act of reading, and the woman she had become. She thought about James, who had seen her at her lowest moment and offered not pity but respect and partnership. She thought about their children, growing up in a world that was slowly changing, armed with knowledge and the understanding that they could be anything they chose. The library they had built together stood as testament to the power of love to resist oppression, to the way individual acts of courage could ripple outward and create real change. It was not perfect, and the world was still filled with injustice and inequality. But in their small corner of the Colorado mountains, they had created something beautiful and true, a place where knowledge was celebrated and women could be fully themselves. Eleanor squeezed James's hand, and he squeezed back, a simple gesture that contained years of partnership and devotion. They sat together in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the life they had built, knowing that whatever challenges the future held, they would face them together as they always had, with love and courage and an unwavering belief that knowledge and freedom were worth fighting for.